Hey.
Hello. Class, say hi. Thank you, Gordon. Okay, so for those of you who are not here and or are watching this later, hello again. We are going to start reviewing continent by continent, all the different groups, and we're going to go unit by unit to try to understand what's going on in this region, how it changes over time, why it changes over time, and what stays the same. So let's start with Unit 1. Class. Weird. That's a weird thing that happened. Who exists in Latin America in this period of time? Now, a lot of people. It's not an empty continent, right? But what group? Let's go with River Valley Civs. No. Aztecs. I know that you want to jump the gun with Quetzalcoatl, but we're not there yet. What civilization? And if I can let me scribble on here, they're kind of around here. I think someone just said it. The Olmecs. Good. So the Olmecs are Latin America's answer to River Valley civilizations. However, it's important to understand that even though we count them as a River Valley civilization, they weren't actually on a river, right? Instead, they're over here. They're on the Gulf of Mexico, or Caribbean Sea, however you look at it. But we still consider them a River Valley civ because they have similar aspects to other River Valley civs. They relied heavily on agriculture, on irrigation, and they were one of the earliest forms, or the earliest groups to live in this region. Gordon, what's wrong with you?
What's the region called? I don't know.
That's Gordon's dying over there. All right, Gordon, easy question. What region?
Is that Mexico?
Region.
Well, if you're doing the homework region, what does the map say?
Mexico.
No.
Yes, it's Mexico.
Yes.
Kind of, but the whole thing is bracketed off as what?
Latin America.
Good. So the whole thing, all of this is technically Latin America. However, if we were to be more specific about this, right, Central America, what's another name for Central America? Mesoamerica. Good. Mesoamerica.
Can we put Latin/Central?
Yep. If you want for region, you can shorten it to LA, Latin America. I'm okay with abbreviations on this. So if you want to do like LA for Latin America, AF for Africa, AS for Asia, that's fine. Euro for Europe, that's all fine with me. Good. So we're looking at the Olmecs in Mesoamerica. Now, it's also important to understand, I didn't write them down, but there are other groups living here as well. One key example, and they live in the backs of the Andes. They're kind of like the precursor to the Inca. They're known as the Chavin. The Chavin, actually. The Chavin of the Andes. They are similar to the Olmecs in that they relied heavily on rivers, irrigation, and early agriculture. Whereas they relied on things like squash and beans and tomatoes in Mesoamerica, and also corn. In the Andes, they don't get corn for a little while longer. Their first crop is actually the potato. And also a grain known as quinoa, which is delicious and healthy. It's the thing I give you every once in a while. My Latin American kids don't eat it. Right, quinoa. Beans, sweet potatoes, stuff like that. But the modern potato that we all know and love and eat all the time because we love potato, that actually comes from the Andes, traditionally. Potatoes are an Andean crop. There are several hundred varieties, if not 1,000 varieties of potatoes out there. We only really eat a couple varieties, but there are a lot of them. So early on in Latin American history, we see different River Valley civilizations popping up, and what unites them and what makes them similar is that they're all reliant on agriculture and irrigation for survival. Unit 2, 600 to 600. We're still not looking at Aztec and Inca yet, but we do see more, and we haven't really talked about this. I'm just filling you in because I don't want you to think that nothing happened in Latin America. We're starting to see other groups pop up in this region. For example, up here, we start to see some early Maya groups. In the Andes as well, we see more of the Chavin. Let me think who else is there. We also see other groups pop up in southern Peru, like the Nazca. Has anybody seen the word Nazca before?
Yeah. NASCAR racing.
No, not NASCAR racing. Dan, there's the door. The Nazca lines. Good. The Nazca lines. They're these really cool. Have you guys ever heard of No, I guess you wouldn't have. Never mind. So the Nazca lines are these lines drawn in the sand and in the dirt up in southern Peru. There's several hundred of them, and not just, and you can look it up on your computers if you want. There's not only just figures and animals, but also different lines drawn out, and we can't quite figure out why. Some people theorize aliens. Other people theorize, I should write these down, the Nazca lines. Other people think that it was a map of the stars. Some people just think they were just decorations, right? But if you look up the Nazca lines, they're really, really cool. These large, intricate animals. And when I mean large, I mean several hundred meters long and wide. Something that you couldn't quite... It's like one of those things, it would take a lot of time to figure out what it's going to look like, and you need an eye for both geometry and engineering to be able to figure this out. Because from a bird's eye view, from a plane's view, they look like the animal. When you're down on the ground, it just looks like ditches, which is really cool. So, right, isn't that neat? So it lets us know that they're not just surviving on food, but we're starting to see the rise of the first time of cultures. And this is one of the hallmarks of this unit, of Unit 2, is the rise of different cultural elements in the arts, in architecture, in religion, in science, in technology, all of these things. Any questions so far? They do sort of resemble crop circles, but on a massive, massive scale. Right, really, really large scale. Some of these are quite big. All right, let's get on to Unit 3, where we start to see the development of civilizations that are going to come in contact with the Europeans. Gordon!
Aztecs.
Yes. So here-ish, we see the rise of the Aztecs. Who else exists as a civilization in Unit 3?
Quetzalcoatl.
That's not a civilization. Quetzalcoatl is a god. Good, the Maya. We also see the Maya, who are down here. They go a little bit into Guatemala and a small bit into Honduras. I just wrote Guatemala. The Maya. Now, interestingly, it's not as important for this exam, but there's actually two phases of Mayan civilization. There's an earlier phase, the classical phase, that ends around 900 CE. They probably died out due to flooding. There's a lot of flooding problems with early agricultural irrigation-based societies. And then there were the post-classical Maya, which existed until like the mid to late 1400s, which is interesting. Rasha, do you have a question?
Oh yeah, so there's this like I don't know what's it called, like a place, like it's not everyone can go because they said in El Salvador because they said that the Mayas once were there or something like that.
That makes sense. Yeah, that whole region, not too further past Honduras, but in Salvador, parts of Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico, particularly the Yucatan Peninsula, there were a lot of settlements. Dozens of Mayan pyramids that you can go see. In fact, the Mayan, what you would identify as a capital city, was in Guatemala. It's called Tikal, which is pretty cool. There's other ones too. The more famous one is Chichen Itza. That's in the Yucatan Peninsula. If you ever go to, what's that big spring breaky kind of resort in the Yucatan? People go there all the time. It'll hit me at some point. But there's a big resort town in the Yucatan Peninsula where a lot of people go, and right outside that is Chichen Itza. So that's become a really big tourist destination, which is kind of cool. So who did I highlight in yellow here? What civilization pops up here? Good. These are the Inca. Now, can you tell me what's similar about all of these civilizations? They're all in Unit 3, yes. They do still rely on agriculture, which we need water for. What's different about the Inca, however, is that in the Andes, it's cold. There's a lot of snow melt, and it rains significantly more than it does in Mesoamerica, which means they don't have to worry about irrigating as much, because what kind of agriculture do they have? Good. They have the terraced farms, if you remember those, which is kind of like if this is your mountainside, there's a person standing at the top of the mountainside. What they would do is they would carve flat bits in it. I'm going to erase this and draw it again. They would carve flat bits in the mountain.
Like St. Mary's soccer field.
So that you could plant things on it, potentially like St. Mary's soccer field, so that you could plant things on it like corn without it falling down the hillside. Somebody had a question? Yes?
When you, like let's say for the Incas, right? For the region, do you just want to put Latin America, or do you want us to put like West Latin America?
Put Latin America.
That's a cute little drawing.
Thank you.
Look at you.
How are the Aztecs different, though, with their agriculture? Chinampas. And what are they and why?
Floating, rice, no,
They grew corn.
I can't explain it.
They're floating on the water.
It's when you place a Minecraft block in the middle.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah.
And you plant something.
So, why did they rely on floating farms? Tell me about the geography of the Aztec.
Yeah.
Good. Their capital city of Tenochtitlan was on a lake, right? So they can't necessarily expands much. So what they do instead are they build these, they're not always square. In fact, they're usually never square. They build these floating platforms.
Were they the ones that's like would settle where a bird holding something on a cactus?
Yes. Good. That was them. And what they would do is they would plant crops on these little agricultural terraces. They would also live on them too. They're not just like tiny little fields. They're massive. Some of them are miles long. So they actually would live on these settlements also. Down in Xochimilco in the bottom of Mexico City, you can still visit some of these. They've kept it more or less the same as from Aztec times. It's one of the few things the Spanish didn't destroy when they came here. Also, we're definitely not going to finish this today, so we'll pick up with Latin America tomorrow, and then we'll move on to Africa after that. I spent too much time talking at the beginning of class. So the Aztec also have agriculture, and like you guys told me, that's called chinampas. Now, what is this evidence of? Okay, engineering, good. Civilization, what else?
Smart.
They are smart. What are other ways in which we can see what we would recognize as like intelligence, other than the fact that they clearly had an understanding of engineering? They're organized. How are they organized?
They made a mound city thing, capital thing.
Well, right, but open the door for Duncan. But what does that mean? How are they organized? Dan Duncan enters the room. Dan Duncan joins the fight. How are they organized, though? So but who is, sorry, I should be more specific. Who is organizing? There's organization, which is evidence of what kind of government? Their social system can be hierarchical. It's not an agrarian government.
No, not government. It's society.
Tell me about their government structure, if they're able to organize and mobilize laborers in such a way to build terrace farms in the Andes and chinampas on Lake Texcoco. They are centralized. Good. Who's in power? A king or an emperor or one strong individual ruler, right? We're not in the age of like democracies and all that kind of stuff. What we're looking at are strong, centralized, powerful leaders. If we look at Unit 3, we can see the continuity and innovation of state forms and their interactions. What stays the same throughout early Latin American culture and continues when the Spanish take over because they bring a similar kind of system is the idea that there is one king or monarch or emperor or whatever you want to call it, one individual person is in control. For the Aztecs, that person was like a mediator between the gods. They were a really powerful family, and they were chosen by the gods. For the Inca actually believed that they were descended from the sun god Inti himself, right, which is really interesting. So in both cases, we're seeing a strong ruler centralizing power, and with authoritarian rule is able to mobilize labor. That's why we see such great things in the Aztec Empire like Chinampas and the massive city and the pyramids and all of the different things they had. That's why in the Andes we see all those roadways that connected the entire empire, thousands of miles of roads, and terraced farming. Even building something like Machu Picchu requires a lot of effort and a lot of labor. Do you guys remember the name of the labor system the Inca used to mobilize? Mita. Good. Encomienda, the Spanish will bring later, but we'll get there. Good. So I mean, we're rushing through it, but what we're looking at are strong, organized, centralized, powerful states in Central and South America. Right? Our best candidate for South America, although there are others, are the Inca of the Andes, and then the Aztecs or the Maya of Central America. And there were some that came before the Aztecs also. Does anybody remember the name of one that came before the Aztecs? Good, the Toltecs. That was kind of a little bit of both, but Toltecs would have been before the Aztec. So let me just write that down. 1 second. So it goes Olmecs, Toltecs, and then Aztecs. There are more, and it's more complicated than this. But what I'm trying to get across is that in Mesoamerican cultures, there seems to be a continuity of culture. They borrow from each other, and they also borrow from the Maya. For example, in Maya, one of their gods, Kukulkan, ends up becoming Quetzalcoatl for the Aztecs. Same god, same purpose, same backstory, different name. Where else in world history, not in Latin America, have we seen two civilizations who live in the same time period where one borrows the gods of the other and changes the name? Rome and Greece. Greek gods became Roman gods, literally the same god, new name. The Romans named them after what we named our planets after.
Poseidon.
Yes. Poseidon became Neptune. Right? Aphrodite, goddess of love, becomes Venus. Same god, same goddess, same backstory, same exact thing, just taken and renamed. The Romans actually did that quite a lot. I'm just going to take your culture and I'm going to make it ours. They did that quite a lot. Right? The Central American empires did that also. They borrowed heavily for each other. For example, the Mesoamerican ball game. Right? The Olmecs literally translates to rubber people. Because they used to take rubber sap from trees, the rubber tree. They would make the balls out of it to play the game. And they created the Mesoamerican ball game, which the Toltecs also used, which the Aztecs also used. So that's another example of how they're sharing culture with each other. So this is one thing we could call continuity in Unit 3. And if you go back and look at Unit 3's poster, a continuity and innovation of state forms and their interactions. What's the other one? Expansion of and intensification of trade networks. Because they are similar, because they are close to each other, they are trading, they are building off of each other, and their states and their cultures and their economies remain consistent. All right, let's start Unit 4 a little bit, and then we will finish this up tomorrow. It's not going to be done today because I had to set up so much in the beginning, but we'll finish this up tomorrow and then do Africa tomorrow also. So if we look at Unit 4, what's the big, cannot escape it, world-changing event? In like 1492.
Columbus.
Sails the ocean blue. Good. The arrival of Columbus in 1492 changes everything. And some of you said, yes, colonization, all that follows, but this is massive. When Columbus comes to the New World, he actually lands in the Bahamas, then he goes to Cuba and Hispaniola and Puerto Rico for a while and goes back. He makes several voyages, by the way. One of his voyages takes him off the coast of Panama, which is neat. But he makes several voyages to the New World, and in doing so, completely changes the fates of both Afro-Eurasia and Latin America. What's one of the other big picture changes that we see as a result of this exploration? What are some like big things that change in the world? This is like globe shifting. I don't like the man so much, but his voyage to the New World, whether he intended to get there or not. Right. Now tell me about how trade changes because of Columbus. Yes. Right? Trade changes. That's the shorthand for change, by the way. Trade changes from land, primarily what trade network? Silk roads, good. To sea. But not just any sea, because they had been trading on the Indian Ocean beforehand, but the Atlantic Ocean becomes a main player. And it stays a main player basically until planes. I mean, yes, even when you colonize Africa and we see more trade with the Suez Canal and the Indian Ocean, the majority of trade is still going to be the Atlantic Ocean. This is the birth of the sugar boom. This is the slave trade. This is tobacco and cotton and all of these things. And this becomes the new powerhouse. It impoverishes Central and South American indigenous peoples. They become colonized by the Europeans. And the Europeans are able to grow immensely powerful and rich because of trade. So rich and powerful that we see the arrival of industrialization and then imperialism of other countries in the globe. Right, so this was a very momentous event. Columbus in 1492 changes trade, and tomorrow we'll look at some of the other ways he changes things also, like cultures, Latin American governance, what happens to those civs, why do they fall, we'll look at all that stuff tomorrow.